this morning with my mind. Staying on Jesus. I woke up this morning with my mind.
Hello. Hey, everyone. I'm Joey Sparks. This is your reminder that God's mercies are new once again this morning. In the first book, O Theophilus, I've dealt with all that Jesus began to do and teach. Those are Luke's opening words in the book of Acts. That's Acts 1 and verse 1. And what Luke accomplishes here is two things. First, he summarizes the book of Luke, the gospel account. And second, he previews this second book, this upcoming book, the book we now call the Acts of the Apostles. What Luke is doing is when he describes the work of God that we saw in the book of Luke, beginning with those birth announcements to Zechariah and Elizabeth and Mary, when he describes those all the way through the very end of Luke, in Luke chapter 24, with the Great Commission and then Jesus' ascension. Notice that he says this is what Jesus began to do and teach. Isn't that interesting? The longest gospel account of the four, in terms of volume of words, Luke now is summarizing and says, I began writing. I began to describe and to outline all that Jesus did and taught. What that should highlight for us here is that in the book of Acts, this is a continuation of the same story and the same work that God began and wrought in Jesus. The book of Acts is an orderly account, just like Luke, that continues the same story about the same work of God. And as we think about that statement from Acts 1 and verse 1 again, he says it's all that Jesus began to do and teach. There's two things that describe the work of Jesus: what he did and what he taught. See, Jesus' ministry was defined by significant actions, his compassion, his miracles, but also by his corrective teachings. He had to challenge the crowd who was kind of in it for self-serving reasons. He had to challenge the disciples who were still struggling to fully buy in. He had to challenge the opponents who had a distorted and warped view of what faith and trust looked like. When you get to Acts, you see the disciples have been changed and they now are carrying on this mission. And you see that through the Holy Spirit working in their lives, through God's power, you see that they do many mighty and wonderful things. You also see that there's a very prominent role in their teaching. Teaching not only of the fulfillment of scriptures over time, teaching of not only what Jesus did, but also what God accomplished through the death and resurrection of Jesus, and then what that resurrected life looks like in Jesus and community-wise as the church. Maybe we see that most clearly in a single verse of Acts 2. You have those 3,000 who've obeyed the gospel. They've been baptized. Verse 41 tells us that those who received the word were immersed, they were baptized. And then verse 42, they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and fellowship. That's a joining, a sharing, to the breaking of bread, the Lord's Supper, and to the prayers. There were things they did and things they taught. And it all came from the apostles, from their authority, because of what Jesus gave to them. Now today, as we think about this concept, it's easy for us to emphasize either doing or teaching to the complete exclusion of the other. We can look out and find people who do that. We may be guilty of that ourselves. But let's be aware of something else. It's probably even more likely, it's even easier for us to just focus on one a little more than the other. What Jesus models for us in Luke is the effectiveness of both doing and teaching. He loved and he carried out and lived out truth. He taught truth. Likewise, the apostles in Acts, the church in Acts, they carry out his will with action. They also teach the truth. They teach the doctrine of God. So as you read through the book of Acts today and this week and this month, notice just that simple interplay between do and teach. Let's be sure we live out, we do the will of God. We love him, we love our neighbor. And let's be sure we teach the truth Search for the truth in His Word always. We thank you for your time this morning. It's our prayer that God's timeless Word will be your meditation all day today.
I woke up this morning